Okay, so we're diving into something a lot of you requested, and
Mhm.
frankly, something I think about a lot too, screen time, but more
Mhm.
specifically, how all that screen time is affecting our mental health.
It's a big one, right? We've got smartphones and tablets and computers and TVs. It's almost like we're never really off.
Exactly, and that's kind of what sparked this deep dive, this idea that maybe it's not just about how much time we're spending on screens, but maybe the way we're using them and how that's impacting, our minds.
Yeah, and I think the podcast we're looking at, it's called Screen Time and Mental Health. They get into some of that.
Okay, so right off the bat, what's the main thing this podcast is trying to get across?
I think the core of it is really exploring that connection, how our screen time habits, maybe some of the not so healthy ones, are contributing to things like stress and anxiety and even in some cases, depression.
Right, because I think we've all felt it. Like you spend hours scrolling through social media and then you just feel kind of, I don't know, blah.
Totally. And the podcast actually talks about this, how those endless notifications, the constant comparing ourselves to other people's highlight reels, that fear of missing out, it all adds up, It creates this kind of underlying anxiety that's hard to shake.
Yeah, it's like your brain never really gets a break.
Exactly. And that's where the whole cognitive function piece comes in. They talked about how excessive screen time can actually make it harder to focus, harder to process information, even harder to just relax and be present.
So it's messing with our brains on a deeper level.
That's what the research suggests, yeah. They cited one study where participants, after spending hours on social media, had a much harder time filtering out distractions. It's like their brains were on overdrive.
Wow, okay, so it's not just about feeling stressed, it's actually impacting how our brains work.
Right, and another thing they discussed that I found super interesting was the whole sleep disruption thing.
Oh yeah, the blue light, right?
Exactly. The blue light that our devices emit, it messes with our melatonin production.
Which is,
It's the hormone that regulates our sleep-wake cycle. So, even if you think you're winding down by scrolling through your phone in bed, that blue light is telling your brain to stay awake.
so it's a double whammy, the mental stimulation and the actual light messing with our sleep. It's kind of scary, to be honest.
It is, and they actually talked about how poor sleep can then lead to a whole host of other problems like mood swings, decreased productivity, even weakened immune systems.
So it's like this domino effect.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to be aware of these things, to understand the potential downsides of our screen time habits.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of the negatives, but hold on. Isn't technology supposed to be this amazing tool that can help us? Like there are meditation apps and online support groups and all that.
You're absolutely right, and the podcast definitely acknowledges that. They talk about how technology can be a really valuable resource for people struggling with mental health, especially those who might feel isolated or have difficulty accessing traditional support systems.
Right, so it's not all bad.
Definitely not. I mean, think about the ability to connect with people who share your experiences, to access information and resources that can help you cope. That's huge.
Yeah, it's all about using it in a way that actually benefits us. Right.
Exactly. Like those meditation apps, it might seem a little ironic using your phone to disconnect, but for some people, that's a great entry point into mindfulness practices.
So it's about finding that balance, harnessing the good, while being mindful of the potential downsides.
Totally. And the podcast actually gave some really practical tips for how to do that.
Like what? Give us the goods.
Well, one of the biggest things they emphasized was setting realistic limits. Now, this doesn't mean you have to go cold turkey, throw your phone in the ocean.
No, tempting sometimes.
I know, right? But it's more about being intentional. So maybe you create tech-free zones in your home, like the dinner table or the bedroom, or you designate certain times of day for disconnecting what they called a digital sunset an hour before bed.
I like that, a digital sunset. It's
Yeah.
kind of poetic.
Right, and it gives your brain a chance to unwind before you actually try to sleep.
But what about those times when you have to be online, like for work or school?
Well, for those situations, they suggest something called mindful scrolling.
Okay, what's that?
It's basically about consciously choosing what you engage with online and setting a time limit for yourself. So instead of mindlessly scrolling through your social media feed for hours.
We're all guilty of that.
Oh, absolutely. But with mindful scrolling, you might say, okay, I'm going to spend 15 minutes catching up on news from these specific sources that I trust, and then I'm logging off.
So it's about being active, not passive in your technology use.
Exactly. And that can make a huge difference in how you feel.
Okay, so setting limits, mindful scrolling, what else?
Well, they also talked about the importance of diversifying your social media feeds. We all get caught in those comparison traps, looking at everyone's perfect lives.
It's so easy to forget that those are just highlight reels, not the whole story.
Right. So the podcast suggests unfollowing accounts that trigger negative feelings, the ones that make you feel inadequate or envious.
Makes sense.
And instead, follow accounts that inspire you, that promote positive messages that make you feel good.
So it's about curating your digital environment, making it a space that supports your mental well-being.
Exactly. And I think that's a really empowering message. We have more control than we think.
I like that. It's not about demonizing technology, but about using it in a way that serves us.
Totally. And I think that brings us to kind of a final thought, a question for everyone listening to ponder. Instead of just asking yourself, how much time am I spending online? Ask yourself this: is my technology use adding value to my life?
Well, that's good. Because at the end of the day, that's really what matters.
It is. It's about creating a healthy relationship with our devices, one that enhances our lives instead of depleting us.
Well said. I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about and hopefully some practical tools to start making some positive changes in our own lives. Thanks for joining me on this one. And to everyone listening, I hope you found this helpful. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.